missing. So far in our sermon series on vibrant discipleship, we've looked at 3 of the 6 marks of discipleship described in Glenn MacDonald's book, The Disciple-Making Church. Those characteristics so far have included having a heart for Christ alone, a mind transformed by the Word, and needs for prayer. The 4th mark of discipleship, and our topic for today, is arms for love. I can picture even today a scene unfolding right here in this worship space. Jesus surrounded by his disciples, by us. I can hear one of us asking Jesus the question, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus responds, loving God with your whole being and loving others as much as you love yourself. The response is the same today as it was in the first century. On November 8th in 1981, Will Durant died. Now, Durant was a highly respected scholar, historian, and philosopher. He and his wife Ariel wrote a monumental work entitled The History of Civilization. And just before his death, at the age of 92, he was interviewed on television. Reflecting on his lifetime of studying and writing about people and events, Durant said, "My final lesson of history is the same as that of Jesus." He continued with a chuckle. "You may think it's a lollipop, but try it. Love one another." Well, many books have been written on the importance of love in the Bible. And herein lurks our challenge. It comes as no surprise that a central building block of the church, or any group that forms in the church, is love. Even people outside the church know that love was central to Jesus and to those who followed him through the centuries. The problem is not that we do not know the answer to the question, but that it is so difficult to live up to that commandment. In the first letter of John in chapter 4, verse 19, he writes, "We love because God first loved us." God is the source of all love in the universe. We are loved because God first loved us, period. In verse 8 of that same letter, John writes, "Whoever does not actively keep on choosing love does not know God." Our relationship with God, knowing God, is revealed by a consistent and ever-growing impulse to love others, even though we regularly fall short of that ideal. The Greeks had a wide vocabulary for their experience of love, and in the writings of the Apostle Paul, he could have chosen any number of words to express one human being's care for another. But when it came to declare the essence of God's love for us, and the kind of love that God commands us to choose, Paul reached out for a word that was rarely used in Greek culture, perhaps because it was so rarely imagined that such a thing might be possible. Paul chose the word agape. Agape describes a love that has no conditions or boundaries. According to the Bible, agape comes from one and only one source in the universe. That source is God. If our hearts are filled with agape, it is only because God has placed it there. All of us are capable of receiving and carrying God's agape love. But it's equally true that all of us leak. We regularly need refills. Agape needs to be replenished daily. Filling our hearts with God's love is a little bit like traveling to Niagara Falls in order to fill a water bucket. There's no serious possibility that the water will run out before our buckets are full, no matter how many times we make that trip. God cannot be diminished by sharing agape with us. Love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Agape never fails, Paul wrote in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. You might recognize this chapter as it is a very familiar reading at many ways. Yet Paul wrote this chapter not to describe a marriage, but to describe the body of Christ and the way the church is to love. Sometimes we humans, I think, may be afraid of love. We are afraid that if God keeps sending new people into our lives, we will not have enough to go around and we will be left completely empty. Paul and I waited for 7 years after we were married before we had our family. When Lizzie arrived, we loved her deeply and unconditionally. 2 years later, I was pregnant with Emily, and I found it hard to imagine sharing such love with a second child. Yet from the moment of her birth, I realized that agape love is not about division at all. It's about multiplication. Immediately, our love doubled. And when Charles was born, it tripled. And it continued to grow with each new family member. Son-in-laws, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, all of our extended family. When God is the source, there is always enough love to go around. There's always enough space to widen our circle of love. The Bible declares that true love is being enthralled by the love of God. Knowing the love of God with our hearts and our minds is life's highest experience and ultimate reward. And the best news is this: God gives it for free. Every day we must choose to receive a fresh filling of God's agape and to ask for the grace to learn how to love when love isn't easy. Jesus calls us, his disciples, to extend arms of love in precisely the same way. Proactively sharing what we have received from God with all those around us. Reverend Bruce Larson shares this story. He says, I was a student minister at a little church up on the Hudson River. I'd go up every weekend from Princeton, where I was in seminary. One weekend, I found out some shocking news. A teenage girl in the congregation had left town to go to her older brother's. She was pregnant. I said to the dear woman who told me, could I go see her? Oh, no, she replied. You're the last person she wants to know what's happened. Suddenly, it hit me, Larson writes. That's what's wrong with the church in our time. It's the place where you go to put on your best clothes, you sit in Sunday school, you worship, you have a potluck dinner together, but you don't bring your life. You leave behind all your pain, your brokenness, your hopes, even your joys. He goes on to say that we have allowed a counterfeit gospel to penetrate our lives, the gospel of rugged individualism, rather than the gospel of Jesus. The gospel of rugged individualism tells us, don't let anyone get too close. Make it on your own. Sharing your hurts, doubts, and weakness is reserved for your family only. How contrary to the gospel of Christ. Even Jesus needed 12 people around him with whom he could be intimate. He fostered a ministry of closeness rather than distance. Jesus calls us to this intimate agape love of one another. 23 times in the New Testament, we are commanded to love each other. But of course, feelings cannot be commanded. But behaviors and attitudes can be deliberately cultivated. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis wrote, do not waste your time bothering whether you love your neighbor. as if you did. As soon as we do this, we find one of the great secrets. When you are behaving as if you love someone, you will presently come to love him. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking him more. If you do him a good turn, you will find yourself disliking him less. In the Bible, love means seeking the good of other people, even if we never have a warm or positive feeling toward them. We love them because God has poured God's own love into our hearts. Paul says that agape is the most excellent way for us to be in relationship with other people, to seek their higher good, just as God seeks our highest good at every point. The story of Ruth that Kevin read this morning exemplifies how two human beings can love in such a way. Ruth and Naomi loved one another and sought the highest good from one another, even though they came from different tribal groups and initially adhered to different religions. As the story unfolds, we discover how their love for one another and the courage to make some tough decisions ultimately leads to lives overflowing with love. And through their descendants, King David of Israel is born. You know, we generally experience love person to person, as in the story of Ruth and Naomi. But what does it look like in community? As a corporate body, love takes on the identity of justice. The church seeks justice for those whose voices are often unheard. Jesus tells us that we are to do for people in Syria and DR Congo, those in Iraq and Puerto Rico, for migrant workers in the United States, and for people crossing our borders, for the hungry and the homeless, for the abused, for the gang member, for the pregnant teen, for the poor, the lost, the least, the last, and the lonely in our world. We are to do for these people, our neighbors, what we would want if we were in their places. The more we welcome God's love into our hearts, the more we possess the power to be hopeful. We look for signs of life in our relationships and do our best to encourage them. Love never gives up because its source and security is God, not the possible response of other people. Nearly every religion tells us it makes sense to love people who will love you back. But Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That is the way Jesus himself related to people. Even at the end of his life, Jesus prayed for those who hung him on the cross. Father, forgive them, he prayed. And Jesus asks us to do the same. Jesus alone can help us love our enemies. But where do we even start? We follow Jesus' example, which involved both prayer and action. I don't think it's possible to hate somebody we regularly are lifting up in prayer. Pray that the rawness of God's reality and God's grace will break into the lives of any person who is intent on hurting you. Pray for their families. Pray for those who commit violent and hate-filled crimes. Pray for their children, that the next generation will know the Prince of Peace and therefore choose to make peace instead of war. Seek justice. Seek opportunities to bless them and seek their highest good. Let God's love shine for you into the dark places of our broken world. Certainly, there will be times when we find ourselves thinking, that's nuts. Why should I pray that someone who has tried to hurt me should even have a shot at receiving God's grace, and then top it off with acts of kindness? At that moment, however, we must listen for another voice, a quiet voice that will say, this is what it means to be like my son. This is what it means to be an authentic, vibrant disciple. God, who is the watcher of human hearts, promises, I will see what you do. I will cause these hard choices to make your heart grow and to bring about healing that will never happen otherwise. The world will literally recognize Jesus' life within us as we pour out this kind of love to others. Whenever we step forward in the name of Jesus with arms of love, Jesus himself is stepping forward. We become the hands and feet of Christ. In our broken and violent world, God is shouting, I need you, whenever his disciples choose to bear that message of love. The biblical perspective is that everyone is invited to share in the life of God and is an image bearer of God, and therefore every person has infinite value. We do not exist separately or independently, but are created to be in community with each other. We change others and we change ourselves by the wonder of being in relationships. Relationships that are fueled and sustained by God's gift of agape. As disciples of Christ in the world, we come alongside others in need, extend compassion, welcome the stranger, and live in a community of mutual care with other disciples. We are on a journey of unconditional love. Jesus taught, by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. All we need is love, yes. And the only way to be so filled is to receive it from the one who declared himself to be love, and to extend our arms of love to others, no matter the cost. As Augustine once prayed to God, by loving the unlovable, you made me lovable. Thanks be to God. Amen.